This is a Sikha from Likkutei Sichos, Chelek Tezvav, Parshas Toldos, Sikha Aleph, and the topic of the Sikha is that in this week's Parsha we learned the pasuk of Ve'ele Toldos Yitzchak, and these are the Toldos, the offspring, the descendants of Yitzchak, and the Medrash teaches that this refers to Esav, and there are 5 parts in the Sikha. The Rebbe number 1 asks how we can say that Toldos Yitzchak refers to Esav more than to Yaakov. Number 2, explain that the path and Aveda of Yitzchak is reflected in his connection to Esav. Number 3, explain the difference between the connection of Avram to Yishmael and Yitzchak to Esav. Number 4, based on this, answer the original question. And number 5, present the Hayrah. On the pasuk at the beginning of our parsha of Eila Toldos Yitzchak, so the Medrash says Moisif al Rishonim. It doesn't say Eila Toldos Yitzchak, it says Ve'eila Toldos Yitzchak, meaning that it's coming in continuation to the Toldos that we learn about at the end of the previous parsha. So it's referring to Al Masha Kosav L'Mayla Hemenu, where it speaks about the Toldos of Yishmael. So it's coming in continuation to the Bnei Yishmael. Umiha Yazeh, who is this that's similar to the Bnei Yishmael? It said Eila Toldos Yishmael, and now it's saying Eila Toldos Yitzchak. Who is similar to the Toldos of Yishmael? It's Esav, Ubanov, Esav and his sons, Shahaya B'nai Shel Yitzchak, who was the son of Yitzchak. And as the Medrash explains, that the similarity is that just like the sons of Yishmael were Rishayim, so too Esav and his descendants were Rishayim. Meaning that Ve'el Toldos Yitzchak refers to Esav, who was a Rasha similar to Bnei Yishmael, and therefore actually says Toldos Chaser. It's missing a vav over there to exclude Yaakov from these Rishayim. And there's a difficulty with this, because according to the Medrash, it comes out that when it says Ve'ela and these, it's mainly emphasizing Esav. The focus is on Esav and not on Yaakov. And there are 2 difficulties with this. Number 1, where do we find in the Sedra that there is a greater emphasis on Esav than on Yaakov? And number 2, and more importantly, how can we say that Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak, these are the Toldos of Yitzchak? It means Esav and not Yaakov. Esav was a Rasha, and Yaakov was a Tzaddik. And we're going to say that Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak, these are the Toldos of Yitzchak, refers to Esav and not to Yaakov. The general explanation of this, and over here we're just going to present the general idea without explaining it, and the rest of the Sikha we're going to explain and elaborate on this idea. So the content, the Toichin of Parshas Toldos is the activities and the Aveda of Yitzchak, which includes his Toldos, his journey to Gerar, his digging wells, and the brachas which he gave. And the Chiddush and the Aveda of Yitzchak over the Aveda of Avram is expressed in the difference between his relationship with Esav and the relationship between Avram with Yishmael. And therefore the Sidra begins with Ve'el Toldos Yitzchak, which is Esav, to teach us that his Toldos, including his Aveda and all of his actions, is apparent and it's expressed in Esav being the Toldos of Yitzchak. So basically what we're saying over here is that when we understand and look into the relationship of Yitzchak with Esav, and the difference between his relationship with Esav and the relationship of Avram with Yishmael, based on that we could get an understanding of the whole Aveda of Yitzchak. And that's why the Parsha begins with this point, Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak, which is Esav. There we see the whole idea and the whole Aveda of Yitzchak expressed. In order to understand how the relationship of Esav to Yitzchak captures the whole Aveda of Yitzchak, and therefore it says Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak referring to Esav, so we're going to do this by contrasting and comparing the relationship of Avram to Yishmael and the relationship of Yitzchak to Esav. And when we look at it, there are opposites in the difference between the connection of Yishmael with Avram and the connection of Esav with Yitzchak, which is difficult to understand. The opposites are that on one hand, Yishmael is closer to Avram than Esav is to Yitzchak, because Yishmael did tshuva in the lifetime, and it makes sense to say that it was also because of Avram. While Esav, we don't see that he did tshuva, and to the contrary, it says that even at his death, he stole the burial of Yaakov. While on the other hand, Esav is closer to Yitzchak than Yishmael is to Avram, because about Yishmael it says, Avram yotzem menu Yishmael, meaning that Yishmael wasn't a Yid, and therefore he wasn't a Yerush of Avram. Ki lo Yerush ben ha'ama hazos im bnei Yitzchak. He wasn't a Yerush, he wasn't a Yid. While Esav, even though it says that Yitzchak yotzem menu Esav, but it was in a way that he remained a Yid, a Yisrael Mummer, but a Yid. and therefore he was and he is a Yerush of Avram. So how do we understand these opposites? That on one hand Yishmael did tshuva and Esav didn't, which indicates that Yishmael is closer to Avram than Esav is to Yitzchak. On the other hand, Yishmael is not considered a Yid or a Yerush, whereas Esav is considered a Yid and a Yerush, which indicates that Esav is closer to Yitzchak than Yishmael is to Avram. So simply, we can explain it as follows: that the reason Yishmael wasn't a Yid or a Yerush is because he was a Ben Amma, whereas Esav was the son of Rivka. So that'll explain to us very simply the difference between Yishmael and Esav. Yes, Yishmael did tshuva. The reason he wasn't a Yid doesn't indicate a distance from Avram per se, as much as it is a result of the fact that he's a Ben Amma. His mother wasn't a Yid, whereas Esav, yes, he did not do tshuva, and he remained a Rasha throughout his entire life, but he is the son of Rivka, and therefore he's a Yid. However, this can't be the explanation, because we find that a few of the sons of Yaakov were the Bnei Shvachas. We have Dan, we have Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, and we see that it says about Yaakov, Mitasei Shlema, they were all the source of Klal Yisrael, the 12 Shvatim. And so from this is understood that before Matan Torah, a Ben Amma can be a Yid and a Yerush. So we're back to our original question: how do we understand this difference between Yishmael and Esav? So from this it's understood that the connection of Esav to Yitzchak is deeper than the connection of Yishmael to Avram, and it's such a connection that's not dependent on him doing tshuva. And this is all going to lead into our answer. So we're first putting the starting point that's going to lead into the answer, which is that we clearly see from here that the connection of Esav to Yitzchak is deeper than the connection of Yishmael to Avram. And we're going to elaborate on this and then continue on to explain why, despite how deep that connection was, nevertheless, and actually as a direct result of that, in a way, that's why Esav did not do tshuva, whereas Yishmael, even though the connection isn't as deep, but the type of connection is such that it caused Yishmael to do tshuva. Now we're going to present the support for this idea, and then we'll move on to explain and elaborate on this idea. So this special connection of Esav with Yitzchak is also hinted to in the Maimer Chazal, that the head of Esav was buried in the lap of Yitzchak. And seemingly this is very perplexing, because the din is that Ein Koivim Rasha Eitzel Tzadik. You're not allowed to bury a Rasha by a Tzadik. And this din is so important to the extent that Hashem performed a miracle, and a miracle of Tchias HaMesim, to avoid such a thing later on in history, by Elisha, where Navi Sheker died by him, and Hashem performed Tchias HaMesim so that he shouldn't be buried together with Elisha. So how was the head of Esav buried in the lap of Yitzchak? And the explanation is that Esav was a Rasha due to his body. However, from the perspective of his head, meaning his source, the way it's cut off, meaning removed from the lowliness of his body, there he's not a Rasha. And to the contrary, from the perspective of his head, he has a connection with Yitzchak, and therefore his head was buried in the lap of Yitzchak. And this is similar to the Satan. It says that the Satan and Pnina, L'shem Shamayim Niskavnu. They have good intentions. However, the way they come down into this world, all that's seen in them is the actual Ra. And there's no more any access to those original good intentions. And so too with Esav, the way he is born from Yitzchak, meaning his source, there it's good. However, once it becomes attached to his body, which is complete and total Ra, there's no place for any revelation or expression of the good. Continuing further with this idea before we actually get into understanding it. So this was the advantage of Esav over Yishmael. Since Yishmael and Esav were the Toldos, they were the offspring of Avram and Yitzchak, so therefore the Koyach Ha'av, that they came from Avram and Yitzchak, remained in them, despite that it says about them that Yatsu, they left. Yishmael is Yatsa from Avram, and Esav is Yatsa from Yitzchak. And this is especially, this idea that the Koyach Av remained in them, is especially since Tzadikim Deiman Lebarin. And it says the Maisi Yadayim, the work or the activities that Tzadikim do, remains forever. So certainly their offspring have this connection to them. Meaning to say, what are we saying over here in terms of that they were Yatza Mehem, but they have the Koyach Av? Meaning that each one of them expresses the Inin and Kedusha of Avram and Yitzchak in the way that the Kedusha of Avram and Yitzchak extends and has an effect outside the boundaries of Kedusha. And the difference between them is in the way the Avos have an influence. By Yishmael, it was in a way that brought him to do tshuva. That's the type of influence, as we're going to explain, of Avram. But on the other hand, he still remained disconnected from Avram. He's not a Yid and he's not a Yerush. This is not so by Esav. He was lower from the perspective of his body, which therefore he didn't do tshuva, which, as we'll see, is connected to the Avodah of Yitzchak. But on the other hand, and this too is connected to the Avodah of Yitzchak, from the perspective of his head, of his source, he's in the lap of Yitzchak. He's a Yid and he's a Yerush. And an example to this are the two ways and types of shlichus. There's a type of shlichus where the shliach, we say, just the action is attributed to the one who sent him. And then there's the way that we say that the shliach himself is connected and is an extension of the one who sent him. And that would be similar to the difference between Yishmael, who's already removed from Avram, like just the action is associated with the Mishaleach, and Esav, who we say it's an extension of the Mishaleach himself. Now, this difference between the Toldos of Avram and Yitzchak is according to the difference, and it fits with the difference in their way of Aveda. Among the differences between the Aveda of Avram and Yitzchak is that the Aveda of Avram is Hamshacha Milmaila Lamata, which means to draw down and reveal a Likus in the world. Whereas by Yitzchak, the Aveda of Yitzchak is Ha'ala Milmata Lamaila, meaning to refine and elevate the world. And this fits with the obvious and clear difference in their actual Avedas. If we look at it, Avram occupied himself with bringing an awareness of a Likus even to the lowest people, which are Arvim, who bow to the dust of their feet. That's the idea of Hamshacha Milmaila Lamata. And Yitzchak occupied himself with digging wells, which means he removed the earth and rocks which cover the living waters, the Mayim Chaim found in the earth. So this represents the idea of refining the world from its earthliness and coarseness to the degree that it recognizes its spiritual source in life, which is the Inyan, the Avodah of Ha'ala Milmata L'mayla. Now, in each of these ways in Aveda, there's an advantage. The advantage of Milmata L'mayla is that in the Aveda of Milmaila L'mata, of Amshacha, Milmaila L'mata, so there the Mata is affected and enlightened from the Maila. However, it's not through any change in the Mata itself. And as we see by Avram, the Aveda of Avram, when he brought a Lakus, awareness and recognition of a Lakus to the Arvim, so the Arvim calling out Kel Olam, it didn't come from a change within them, rather they remained the same, and it came from the Vayakri of Avram. He made them call out, and therefore it's all attributed to Avram, and they ultimately remained the same Arvim. Whereas by the Aveda of Ha'ala Milmata L'mayla, the Aveda of Yitzchak accomplishes that the connection of the Mata to the Maila results from the Mata changing and gaining a connection with the Maila. And this is similar to the actual Aveda of Yitzchak, similar to digging wells. When one digs a well, water isn't brought from another place, rather reveals the water that was hidden in that place, and the place itself becomes a place of water. So by Amshacha Milmaila L'mata, the Mata remains a Mata. All the Aveda, all the work is being done from the Maila. There's a Hamshacha Milmaila L'mata. The Mata remains a Mata, but there's a Hamshacha here that's happening from the Maila. Whereas in Allah Milmata L'mayla, by definition what's happening over here is that the Mata is being elevated. So the Mata becomes connected and transformed to have a connection to this Aveda. It's part of the Mata itself. On the other hand, and for this very reason itself, there's an advantage in the Aveda of Hamshacha Milmaila L'mata over the Aveda of Ha'ala Milmata L'mayla. By the Aveda of Hamshacha Milmaila L'mata, the Eir Eliki shines in the Mata as the Mata is in its place of loneliness, because the Mata remains in its place. There's Amshacha that's occurring from above. Now, because the Amshacha is all Milmaila L'mata, the Mata remains a Mata, but also, as a direct result of that, it means that the air is being brought down all the way to the place of the Mata in its loneliness. Like Avram bringing awareness of Hashem to the Arvim the way they were in their state, that they bow to the dust of their feet. Whereas by the Avodah of Ha'ala Milmata L'mayla, so it's not so over there. There, the connection to the Maila is accomplished through the Mata elevating from its lowliness. So yes, the Mata elevates itself, and now it becomes the identity of the Mata, this Aveda. But at the same time, the Mata elevated itself. It's no longer in its original state of lowliness. So therefore, the place of the mata isn't illuminated. The mata that was there before, in its state of lowliness, has refined itself, has elevated itself. So yes, it's connected now to this whole avodah, but it's not in its previous state any longer. It's now refined. It's now elevated, meaning that the elokus is not impacting and extending all the way to the place of the mata, the way the mata is in its lowliness. So that's the advantage of the avodah of hamshocha l'mayla l'mata, that the the key goes down to the mata in its place, in its original state of lowliness. This second difference and the advantage of the avodah of hamshocha l'mayla l'mata is the basis for the difference between the Avodah and conduct of Avram and Yitzchak. We find by Avram that Avram left Eretz Yisrael and he descended to Mitzrayim, meaning he descended into the Mitzrayim and Gvulim, the restraints, the limitations, the boundaries of Chutz La'aretz. So Avram also illuminated Chutz La'aretz, because it goes all the way to the Mata in its place of loneliness. Whereas by Yitzchak, on the other hand, he wasn't allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. He was able to engage with the part of the world that stands higher, but not with the lowliness of Chutz La'aretz, just like the Avodah of Ha'ala, Milmata L'mayla, where the Mata is elevated and refined, that it's no longer in its state of loneliness. According to this, we can now answer our original question and understand the difference between Yishmael and Esav. So this is the basis for the difference between Yishmael and Esav. By Avram, the outcome of the approach of Avram, which is the Avodah of Hamshocha L'mayla L'mata, is that even when his Toldos are on a level of Mata, like Yishmael, who was a Ben Ha'oma, and to the extent that he was Yotzel L'tar B'Sra, even in that state of a Mata, he still influences him and succeeds in making him do tshuva, because that's the whole idea of Avram, that's the whole idea of Hamshocha L'mayla L'mata, that it goes to the Mata. And this is also why marrying Ha'ama Azais, marrying Hagar, doesn't contradict, but to the contrary, fits with the Avodah of Avram. Because the Avodah of Avram is Amshacha, Milmaila, all the way to the Mata. However, since this was a result of the influence of Avram, like it says, Mishames Avram, Nofel, after Avram passed away, Yishmael returned to his previous state. So since it's all because of the Hamshocha Milmaila Lamata, the Mata is not affected, is not elevated, is not refined, so therefore Yishmael wasn't elevated to the level of Avram. From the perspective of the essence of Yishmael, he was Yatsa from Avram. He wasn't a Yid, and therefore he can't be Yerush Avram either. However, the Indian of Yitzchak, which is the Avodah of Ha'ala Milmata L'mayla, is that the Mata itself is elevated, and this is also reflected in his Toldos. The way his Toldos are born from him, which is his all Avedas, that the Mat is elevated, so they, from their perspective of their essence, have a connection to him. And this is also why Yitzchak could not marry an Amma, whose Toldos from their very at their very essence aren't connected to his level. He could only have a connection to a Mata that's elevated. So also Esav is a Yid and a Yerush. However, this is only from the perspective of the head of Esav, meaning his source. However, the way it connects to his body, the place of the Mata, there he is Yatsa in a way there is no connection to Kedusha, and therefore he didn't do tshuva. And that's why the klipa of Esav is much harsher and more severe than the klipa of Yishmael. Because the Avodah of Yitzchak does not go down to that place, and it doesn't reach that place of the Mata. And that part of the Mata is completely removed from him in terms of Yishmael, in terms of Esav not doing tshuva. And in brackets, we have over here in the Sikha that these two ways of Avodah of Avram and Yitzchak are a preparation, they're a achana for the Avodah of Yaakov, who had both aspects of Avram and of Yitzchak. On one hand, Yaakov descended to Chutz La'aretz, which means like Avram Avinu, he went to the place of the Mata. But on the other hand, when he went to the place of the Mata, he didn't enlighten the Mata over there, the way Avram did, and the Mata remained the Mata, but rather he established the Shvatim over there in a way of Mitasei Shlema, similar to the idea of Yitzchak, that all of his children are connected to him, that they're all Yidden. So on one hand, he went to Chutz La'aretz, he engaged that place of Mata, but not in a way of Hamshacha U'mayla L'mata, that the Mata remains removed and disconnected, but rather in a way that the Mata itself is elevated, and his children over there are all Yidden. And it's for this reason that he was able to marry Shvachas, because from the perspective of the Avodah of Yaakov, also Toldos born from Shvachas can be Shvatim. Unlike by Avram, where the Toldos from Shvachas are not Yidden, and by Yitzchak, as a result, he didn't marry a Shivcha, Yaakov is able to marry a Shivcha, and the children from the Shvachas are part of the Shiftei Ka. Now, according to this, we can understand why a large part of the Sedra of Toldos, which, as we explained, refers to Esav, relates the preparation for the brachas of Yitzchak and the brachas themselves, because this too expresses the avodah of Yitzchak in his connection to Esav. The reason Yitzchak wanted to bench Esav, even though he was aware of who Esav was, is because Tzayid Bepiv, meaning in the head of Esav and the source of Esav, there are very high netzaitas, like the neshamas of Uncle Sager, Rabbi Meir, and others. And since the avodah of Yitzchak was digging wells to dig and find the living waters, the Mayim Chayim, which are hidden in the depth of the earth, so therefore he wanted to dig up and reveal the Mayim Chayim, meaning the Nitzaitis of Gdusha, in the head of Esav through the brachas. And indeed, as Yitzchak views Esav, he is taka deserving of these brachas. However, since Yatsa Mimenu Esav, he is undeserving and unable to receive these brachas. And therefore the brachas were given to Yaakov because he specifically, like we said, had the power to refine Esav, because he's even able to go to the place of the Mata and over there engage the Mata and transform the Mata. The Ira from all of this to us is simply, if Esav Arasha, who was before Matan Torah, has the title of a Yid because he was a son of Yitzchak, and if Yitzchak also worked by Esav or on Esav to dig out and reveal his hidden self, so how much more so for Yidden after Matan Torah. After Matan Torah, the Koyach and Chayas, the Elikecha, Koychacha v'Chayischa, of every Yid, regardless of whatever state they are in, is Anochi Avaya. Anochi Avaya became Elikecha, Koychacha v'Chayischa of each and every Yid. And especially since also those Yidden who aren't behaving appropriately are even in their outward appearance infinitely higher than Esav. And this is in addition to most of them today being in the category of a Tinnik Shenishba. So certainly we must dedicate ourselves to bring all Yidden, even those who are far from Yiddishkeit, close. We must dig and reveal the Mayim Chaim, the living waters that every Yid has. At the same time, we must make sure that it is done in a manner of Oyev Esabriyas and Mekarvan LaTeira. We have to bring them close to Torah. And this is also hinted to when Rashi says that Eila Toldos refers to Yaakov and Esav Ha'amurim Beparsha. It all has to be the way it is in Torah. So we have to bring them to Torah. And the way to achieve this, of bringing each and every Yid close to Yiddishkeit, is by looking at each Yid the way they are from the perspective of their head. Because then, when a person looks at the Sherish and Mokar of every Yid, the essence of every Yid, one doesn't see the lowliness of their outward state, but rather the loftiness of their essence and inner being. In their essence, they want to fulfill the entire Torah. And as a result, one will do everything they are able to do to uplift them and draw them closer to Hashem, His Torah, and His mitzvahs, to Torah, to Mimah.